Senator from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm really happy the Senate's engaged in this debate on tax policy. It actually is long overdue. It's been 30-some-odd years since this country's undertaken a massive reform of our tax code. And it's interesting, if you go back and think what life was like back in 1986, it's just a different planet, different world, different economics. And so at a minimum, our code needs to be modernized. But everybody has run on it. I mean, everybody that runs for office, certainly every candidate for president on both parties for over 2 decades now has run on the promise of tax reform and the need for it. So this is a really important debate, and what we're debating now on this budget, so people that understand that are watching at home, it's the budget is not, you and I at home think of a family budget as a plan on what you're going to spend money on, and that's what the federal budget is. It's kind of an outline, a framework of how and the parameters under which the government would spend its money. Then you have to actually go out and spend it through a separate process called appropriations. So this budget creates the framework for how we're going to spend money in the year to come, and then it's going to be used as a vehicle to pass tax reform, which is obviously the way and the system under which we generate revenue for the government to pay for the things that we need to be paying for, and that's the first debate. But obviously the debate on the budget has already led us to this debate on tax reform, because that's the purpose, that's the primary purpose it's being used for this year, is as a vehicle for it. Why does that matter? There's a lot of speeches going on already about tax reform and how bad the bill is and how this is a giveaway for this group of people or that group of people. That's hard to do since there still is not a bill. And the reason why there is still not a bill is because it's going to be worked through the normal process of the Senate. That was the criticism, for example, from my friends on the other side and many outside of this building and the press. The criticism was, you guys put together a health care plan and you didn't even go through committee and no one had any input and there were no public hearings. That's what they're going to do with tax reform. And that's what's going to produce a bill. The only thing that's been put out is called a framework. And the framework basically says, these are some of the ideas that we have. This is our starting point that we want to operate from. But we're going to go through the committee process, and there's going to be votes, and there's going to be an opportunity to weigh in and make differences. And from that, we intend to produce a tax bill. And so you can criticize the framework, I suppose, but to basically go out and start trying to convince people that there's a tax bill that will do this versus that, when that's just not true, and when you have a seat here in the Senate and potentially on the committee where you can actually weigh in about the specifics of what's going to be in the bill and what's not, I think it's unfair and disingenuous. And, but in any event, that's kind of the way things go nowadays. And so I look forward to that debate. The second thing that's been an interesting development is to hear people talking about how horrible this is going to be, this is going to add to the debt, and all of a sudden a bunch of people who have never had any problem spending as much money as they possibly could out of the federal treasury are suddenly becoming deficit hawks. Here's what's so interesting. If we were to turn around and say, forget about tax reform, we're going to take $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and we're going to use it, debt spending, we're going to borrow $1.5 trillion, and we're going to use it to fund all these things the government's going to do. For example, one of our colleagues here has offered a plan to provide health care for everyone in America paid for by the federal government. That would cost tens of trillions of dollars. Over a dozen members of the Senate have signed on to it as a plan. But there's no plan to pay for it. Not $1.5 trillion over 10 years, like tens of trillions of dollars over the next number of years. Not a lot of concern there. So it kind of boils down to, we're prepared to borrow money and spend it so long as the government gets suspended. But if this is money that we're going to take and give it to you to spend, well, then that's a real problem, and that's irresponsible. So that's just kind of this framework. The second point I would make on the debt is, I believe the debt is a significant threat to the future of the United States. The problem is we can't tax our way out of it, and we can't simply grow our way out of it. We've got to do a combination of things. The first is we have to grow our economy. And the second thing we have to do is bring some constraint to future spending. Not slash Medicare, not get rid of Social Security. My mother's on Social Security and Medicare. This may surprise many people watching, but there's a significant number of people in my home state of Florida on Social Security and on Medicare. As I said, my mother's one of them. I'm an enormous supporter of these programs. I also look at those programs, and I look at the number of people going into it and how long they're going to live. And the math tells you these programs are going to have some big problems in the years to come, which threaten not just to take them down, but threaten to trigger a debt crisis in America. So we have to deal with the spending side and create a more disciplined way of spending in the future years to bring some certainty, but we also have to grow the economy. In essence, if you just take a stagnant economy, no cuts in the world are going to get you there. You can't just simply cut your way, and you can't just simply tax your way. The only solution to our debt problem, and it happens to be good for America all around, is the combination of discipline on future spending combined with rapid, robust, and sustained economic growth. And as much as anything else, this effort at tax reform is, among other things, an effort to generate sustained economic growth, and to do so in a unique period in the history of the world. This is not 1986. Our economy is not the only show in town anymore. There are now dozens of developed economies around the world that, following our example from the 80s, reduced taxes, reduced regulations, frankly, made investments in infrastructure and the like, and today they are no longer recipients of our aid. They are no longer nations looking to work with the United States to get a little bit closer to the way we are. They are full-blown competitors in the global economy. So every 4 years, every 2 years actually, once in the winter and then the next 2 years in the summer, we send our best athletes in different events to the Olympics to compete. Well, in our economy, it is the Olympics every single day. And what makes it even more complicated is that sometimes our team isn't just made up of Americans. Our team has partnered with the Japanese team to create a company, or the Mexican team to create a manufacturing chain. So that complicates it further. But the fundamental thing to understand is America today is in a competition. And by the way, a competition that doesn't have to be one where they lose and we win, or we lose and they win, but a competition nonetheless. And every day, businesses, investors, people with ideas are making a decision: where do I want to do this activity? Where do I want to create this new job? Where do I want to create this new company? Where do I want to innovate this new idea? And where do I want to hire people to do all this? Do I want to do it in America? Do I want to do it somewhere else? And we are not performing well in that competition. And it's not just because of taxes. We have infrastructure problems that we have to confront. We have a higher education system that is not built for the 21st century. We are not teaching people in sufficient numbers the skills they need for some of the best jobs in the world. Look, I have no problem with a 4-year degree from a liberal arts college. That should be always an option on the menu. But we sure need a lot of plumbers and pipe fitters and electricians and people that can do welders. These are important jobs as well. And in fact, oftentimes pay a lot more than a 4-year degree in political science will ever pay you. So we need to do a better job of training people in those fields as well. We need to have an immigration system that's pro-American, but pro-American economy that allows us to compete for the best talent in the world. If you think about it, I don't see anybody complaining that their team just signed a guy who can throw 98-mile-an-hour fastballs, but he's from the Dominican Republic. And so if in sports we go out and find the best people, we should be able to do that in our economy as well, and you can do that without hurting the American worker. But we also have to have a tax code that's competitive. It cannot be substantially more complicated and expensive to start a business or operate one in America than it is somewhere else, because if we do that, we will lose. And that, as much as anything else in this global economy, is hurting the American people. You talk about putting America first. I think it's about allowing America to compete. I'm not asking for an unfair advantage over other countries. We're just asking for a fair chance to compete, because I believe the American people, if given the chance to compete, can outthink, out-innovate, and outwork anybody in the world. And our tax code's a key part of it. And so the goal here, when you hear a lot of this talk about businesses getting this or that deduction, is we want to make America an attractive place to invest. We don't want people taking that money and investing all of it in another country. We want them to invest it here. Invest it here to allow a company to grow and hire more people. We want companies to decide this is the place where we want to hire, this is the place where we want to innovate. We have to have a tax code that reflects that. We have to understand that the vast majority of American businesses don't pay taxes the way the big companies do. They pay it as small businesses through pass-throughs. And a lot of these, and you know them because I know them, these are not sophisticated operations. They're successful, but they don't have an army of lawyers to deal with a complicated tax code and accountants that know every trick in the book. And to them, the tax code hurts them, especially since they're paying on their personal rates. And that's why the personal side is related to the business side. These are things that we need to deal with so we can be competitive, so we can have more taxpayers. Not more taxes, more taxpayers. More people making more money not just improves their quality of life, it generates more revenue to pay for the bridges, the roads, and the national security of the United States of America. So tax reform, as much as anything else, is the growth side of this endeavor. And it is not the only thing we need to do, but it is an important thing we need to do if we are going to let America compete and win in the 21st century global economy. There's another dynamic of the 21st century that's different from 1986. And from that, I rely heavily on my own personal experience, not just today, but growing up. In 1986, what was I been, ninth grade or something? And my parents, my mom worked at Kmart, and my father was a bartender in Miami. And we owned a home. And we didn't have everything we wanted, but we had everything we needed. And they were able to sustain a family and allow us to go to school, public school, go on to college, and do those sorts of things on the salary of a bartender and a stock clerk at Kmart. I don't need to tell anybody here that there isn't a community in the country at this point in the 21st century where my parents could achieve the standard of living that they had in 1986 for two reasons. Everything costs more, and those jobs either don't exist anymore or have not kept pace with that cost of living. Now, since the year 2000 up till today, my wife Jeanette and I have been raising 4 children in the 21st century, and I enter it by telling you that while we certainly have been blessed to have more resources available to us than the vast majority of people who will be impacted by what we're about to do here, I certainly have enough people in our lives and have certainly had periods in our lives where we understand some of the challenges facing people today. And here's the bottom line. Raising children in the 21st century is more expensive than raising children at any point in the history of this country. And the reason is there's more things to pay for. I know people may tell you that Wi-Fi and access to the internet is a luxury. I'm sorry, you can't do homework in the 21st century with your kids if you don't have access to the internet. And that costs money. And not only do you have to have access to the internet, you have to have access to it in a mobile device. And those mobile devices cost money. Those data plans cost money. And if you're paying for a data plan, you know how much they cost. It's not just about watching movies on Netflix or talking to your friends on Snapchat. You literally cannot do homework in many of the schools in the country in the 21st century unless you have access to it. And that's why I personally have witnessed people at McDonald's at 6:30 in the evening because they have free Wi-Fi. And the single mom or the single dad is there helping their kids with homework. The cost of everything keeps going up, of clothing, of food, of everything. And you look at our tax code, and it has not kept pace with it. So let me give you an example. Accounting for inflation, from 1960 to 2015, which is when the latest numbers were available, the average cost per child of raising that child in a middle-income family went up by over $11,000. Over $11,000 more expensive, accounting for inflation. Here's a stunning figure. And again, this is different in different communities, but by and large, for middle-income families, and by that we mean a firefighter and a teacher who are raising a child, they're going to spend approximately $230,000 to raise that child in the 21st century from 0 to 18. And by the way, although my oldest is now 17 and a half, I've been told by plenty of my colleagues that it doesn't end at 18. In many cases, it begins to accelerate in some form or fashion. But nevertheless, $230,000. And let me tell you something else. That doesn't even include college. That doesn't even include going to college, which is another thing we're going through right now, which, by the way, is completely and totally out of control in terms of what they're charging. And it's more than that. It's more than that. There are people now out there spending $10,000 or $15,000 on SAT prep courses. For the life of me, I don't understand how these schools can expect someone who comes from a single-parent home in a poor neighborhood could keep pace with people who are having these sorts of resources available to them. But that's another topic for another day, but that's a cost that's involved in all of this. How about child care? In 38 out of 50 states, child care is more expensive than college. So think about it. Let's say you take home $900 a week, and child care is $250 or $350 a week. That's a third of your paycheck just for child care. So these things are reducing the ability of families to afford to have children and to raise them. And these costs keep going up. And so one of the things that we've offered as a partial solution, it's not going to solve every problem, is to increase the child tax credit and to do so in a way that actually helps people. Because what it would do is it would reduce families' tax bills on a per-child basis, increasing the flexibility that family has in a time when, for example, child care costs have risen more than ever before and are already higher than they've ever been. So if we want, and I think the other advantage is this is not We have to understand the family is the most important unit in all of society. It is the most important institution in society. It's the first government, it's the first school, it's the core institution that underlies everything else we do as a nation. There's no more important job that any of us will ever do than the job of a parent. And if you think about our tax code, it says if you invest money in a piece of equipment or a business, the tax code will help you with that. But if you invested in a future American taxpayer, if you invested in someone who we are going to need to build the sort of economy and future we want for our nation, the tax code does not really take it into account. That makes no sense to me. So I have two charts here to kind of outline how important this tax credit is to tax reform. And again, I'm operating off the framework because there's no bill out yet, but based on the framework, the amount of tax relief that a working or middle class family will get almost entirely will depend on what we do with the child tax credit. So here's the first chart. This chart shows the average tax cut for American families if the child tax credit is doubled from its current size, not just doubled, but we make it refundable against payroll tax liability, which is the tax every American pays, right? For Social Security and Medicare, it's the first chunk that comes off your paycheck, no matter how little you make, everyone pays it. If we make the child tax credit double and we apply it towards your liability on payroll tax, this chart, which is what I've proposed, what Senator Lee and I have been working on, what Ivanka Trump has been advocating, and we've been working with her office on, and this shows you what the impact of that would be. And that's the blue line. And you can see from the blue line that that chart begins with some cut, depending on how much money you make, and it begins to drop as the amount, obviously, the more money you make, the larger the credit will be up to its limit because you can't get a credit if you're not making any money at all, even if it applies to payroll tax. But you start to see it also grows with the number of children because it's per child. So it doesn't just phase off at 2 children. And that's the blue chart. Now, what's the red chart? The red chart is if we do nothing, or basically just do a gimmicky thing about it. Then you start to see that without the child tax credit being made refundable, and without the child tax credit applying to payroll refundable, and without the child tax credit being per child and sufficiently increased, this framework will be a tax increase. People will actually pay more. And the more children you have, the bigger your tax increase will be. So suffice it to say, we got to do it. I mean, this red line cannot be what we wind up at. And I don't think that's the intent of the people that drew up the framework. But that's where we wind up if we don't do it. So I pulled that chart out just to show you how important it is that we do it as part of this framework. It has to happen. It has to. It won't pass without it. And it's the right thing to do. This is a pro-job, pro-family initiative. And I actually think it's pro-growth. It's hard for economists to measure it that way, but it would be. There are a lot of people that can't start a business because they can't afford to leave the security of a certain type of employment. The tax credit frees that up for them to be able to do. So let me get to the second chart, if I could get it up here real quick. How can we, this kind of shows you basically the same dynamic, but now based on how much people are making, what kind of jobs they do. So we picked out just arbitrarily some of the jobs that many of us know people are in these fields. A home health aide, a retail person working sales, at Macy's or whatever, office clerks, we all see office clerks every day, a truck driver, a vocation like a nurse, firefighters. Obviously, I have 3 firefighters in my own family. And again, the 1,500 child tax credit was only first 1,000 refundable. You start to see that red line here, how pathetic it is for these folks in these professions. Doesn't really do much. But look at the blue line. That's where we want to get to. That's the $2,000 at least $2,000 child tax credit applied to their payroll tax. And now you start to see the figures get better here. You start to see the home health aide getting about $1,000 in relief. The retail salesperson, a little bit under $1,000. The truck driver, between the truck driver and the office clerk, getting down here to $1,400. The nurse getting down here to about $1,200. The firefighter getting down here to about $1,200. Now, a lot of people will tell you, well, $1,200, $1,400 is not going to change the world. It'll help. I didn't say this is the solution to every problem. The other solution is to get, these salaries up higher. That's the other part of it. But the other solution is to get the cost on some of these things lower, like get a grip on, the cost of getting college credits. The other solution is to provide more opportunities for child care options for people. But there's no way this doesn't help. It helps. It helps. And it helps the people we need to help. And it helps us get closer to the goal that we all have for this nation, and it is a place of equal opportunity. Because we pride ourselves on equal opportunity, but I am telling you that we are lacking equal opportunity if two children growing up in two different homes, one has access to quality K education, and then quality schooling, and then the right support for that schooling, and one does not. By the time you're a junior and senior, and it hurts you. It absolutely hurts you in your way forward in life. This is not the solution to all of our problems. That would be misleading. But it is a big step in that direction, and it would show in tax policy that we are supporting the most important institution in society, which is the family. The most important function any of us will ever do, which is to be a parent. And we are investing in America's future. The children being raised, the 2, 3, 4 children, you know who those are? Those are the people that are going to fund Social Security and Medicare when I retire, and many of you retire. These are the people that are going to be starting the businesses, and these are the people that are going to be the backbone of our economy, not in 50 years, in the next 10, 15, 20 years. This is the future of America, literally and figuratively, the future of our nation that we would be investing in. And we would be allowing their parents to make that investment on their behalf, who are the right people to be making it. And so this has to be a part of whatever else happens. And I think this has strong bipartisan support. I know the White House supports it. I'm optimistic that it will happen. The only thing that would keep it from happening is if tax reform itself goes down. But this has to happen. There's no choice but to do it. We have to, and it's the right thing to do. And I'm pleased we've come this far on it, and now I look forward to the work to get it achieved. But it can't just be a gimmick. It can't just be, we increased the child tax credit by a little bit. If we don't do it right and sufficiently and structure it in an appropriate way, you'll be raising taxes on working families. That can't happen. I know no one here wants to see that happen. And so we'll have a lot of debates about everything else, but this is the one I hope will have strong bipartisan support as we move forward on tax reform. And I'm excited to be able to work on it.